We have the opportunity to ask questions following the service here at IRBC. Who has the first question? I think we have a question.
Hi. Hello.
Should be hot.
Is it on?
There it is. It's hot.
Is it on? Okay, good. Acts 24:5, when it talks about the sect of the Nazarenes, do you know if that's the same Nazarene church that exists today?
Clearly not.
Okay. What were they into, do you know?
Well, Jesus was from Nazareth, so he was called a Nazarene. So as a derogatory method of destroying Christ's reputation, backing up a little bit, you might recall when Christ was challenged, I believe this is in Luke and Matthew, he was challenged by whose authority he does his miracles. And he says, well, I'll tell you that if you tell me this. The baptism of John, was that of men or was that of God? And the reason why I asked that question was, in their system, you could only sort of graduate with the approval of another rabbi. That's how it worked. And so one rabbi is growing older, but you have to have younger rabbi. You have to approve the next rabbi, right? But here's John, crazy John, eating insects and honey and wild honey. He must have been some kind of guy to eat wild honey. Anybody here ever try wild honey? I mean, I got honey. I got the store. It's got out of a jar. Try getting wild honey out of the. Yeah, fight off the bees. How about that? Okay, here he is. He has no one's approval at all, and yet people are believing him and being baptized by him. And so they're scared to say, because they just don't want to say. And so when Christ's point was, okay, John had no approval. I don't either, and I don't need it. So what do you do with someone who has that kind of approval they didn't approve? You stick them with a title like the Nazarene, like you know that guy from Nazareth. What's his name? Yeah, and we know that Nazareth was not, shall we say, the spiritual Athens of the day. Let's just put it that way. And Christ did not challenge. I think it was Nathaniel who said, "Can any good thing come from Nazareth?" Christ didn't even challenge that. Oh, come on, Nazareth is a good place. Like Reading, Pennsylvania is a great place. He didn't even challenge that point. Yeah, absolutely good things have come from Reading. I'm sure of it. I used to live there. But that was their point there. Who's this guy? The Nazarene. Sect of the Nazarenes. We don't recognize that.
Pastor, early on you addressed our modern ethics for conversations and debate. And I have heard it argued from preachers that you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. This idea of being soft when you make your argument, to be willing to give ground when you're in discussions, when you're evangelizing, when you're debating. How ought we respond to that? Because clearly, Paul and Christ himself did not follow the same ethics.
Yeah. In fact, I just had a long conversation with Seth Brown. Seth Brown is our pastor of our daughter church in Columbia. We had a long conversation. I asked him this question as we were discussing this. I said, do you know anyone in the Bible who was a more bitter-end arguer than Christ? And he thought about it. He said, maybe Paul. I said, and then we talked about it. I said, well, Paul sort of gives us the examples of his arguments, and we know what happened. We don't know the words in many cases. In some cases we do. Most of the time we don't. But in Christ we have the word-for-word battles. John 9, for example, we have another example, and Seth brought this up, of a guy who was a bitter-end arguer, and that's John 9. That's the guy that got thrown out of the synagogue when he got his when he got his sight back. And the only guy that actually told off, that I know of in the way he did it in all Scripture, where he kind of told them off and said, do you want to be his disciples? And he was insulting them, is what he was doing. I will tell you this, and I know I've alluded to this before. When I began to study Christ and saw that most of his teaching occurred in hostile situations. And if I was writing the Gospels, I'd be all about the miracles. I'd be all, and the writers aren't like that. They're more about his conflicts with the people that didn't believe in him. And if you see his conflicts, as I know, he didn't leave them out. And when we hear people say today, and I'd be interested in any kind of challenge to what I'm about to say, but when we hear people say you attract more flies with honey, I'm not really into attracting flies myself. I'd rather kill them all, frankly. All of them. Every fly. And the mosquitoes are next. But when we say these kinds of things, I think what they're really saying is you need to not be so direct. You need to leave them their dignity. You need to leave them standing at the end of the discussion. I think that's what they're really saying. And Paul and Christ don't do that kind of stuff. I think that's what, if anybody has any more insight on that, I'd like to hear it. But that's what I believe is really being said. Don't be so strident. Well, Christ was pretty strident. Yeah. Yeah, what would Jesus do really means, what would I do if I were Jesus? Bad question.
I made a post on Facebook about if you knew someone was about to do something very self-destructive and also destructive to other people, would it be justified to be harsh and, really rebuke them? And it's not, that's the ultimate love, is to really tell it like it is. Because if you leave them in a place where it's okay, it might be okay, the direction they're going, they'll be in, they're held bound. So that's why I'm sure Christ and Paul hit them between the eyes, right?
Yeah, really. Who shows the love?
Right, that's real.
Who really shows the love? The ones that tells them that you're headed for hell, or the ones who say it's all right, don't worry about it, you're okay, you're a child of Abraham, they're all going to heaven. Who's really loving? May God help us all to be loving, frankly.
I'm just concerned in a case like that we have to understand the person who is in that place may not be able to handle a direct. There's a difference between scriptural admonition and maybe rebuking someone who is in a vulnerable situation, psychologically, mentally, emotionally. That's my concern.
Yeah, we've all been there, and there's some difficulties here. My challenge is to encourage us all to look at the way it was done in the Bible. For example, I'll give a quick example. I was just looking at this week and thinking about this. Spend some time on this. We say that Christ was hard on the religious leaders. You've all heard that. Christ was like, okay with everybody else, but he was hard on the religious leaders. And if that's all it is, then maybe I shouldn't be a religious leader. Maybe I ought to get out of the religious leader business if I'm even in it. But that's not actually the case all the time, because the one time, for example, and this is a time when it says that they were offended by him. Now, we don't have a statement ever that the Pharisees were offended. I mean, we know they were, but in terms of a scriptural statement. There's one point when the disciples go to Christ and say the Pharisees were offended. But we don't ever have a statement where they said, where Luke or Matthew or John or Mark says the Pharisees were offended. We do have a statement in that case, though, and it's not the Pharisees. And it's when he went and read from Isaiah, and they said, who is this? And he said, this, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, right? And Luke and Mark, I believe, I'm not sure about Matthew. Luke and Mark say specifically, they say, isn't this, we've known this guy, who is this guy? And specifically says they were offended at him. So we do have the case where Christ, we always think of religious leaders, but he actually did really seriously offend those folks when he said, you know, guys, and this would be offensive. It would be so offensive. I think I can relate. He says, you know, guys, prophets not really appreciated. Oh, by the way, no lepers were ever healed except Naaman the Syrian. And when Elijah wants to go, when Elijah needs help, he doesn't go to anybody in Israel. Now, they were really offended by this. You know, and basically what they're saying is, if Christ is going to come, he's going to come to us because we're okay. All that to say is, you're right. There are people that just can't take it right now. I just don't want to think that everybody's like that, because the examples in the Bible are pretty stiff medicine. Pretty stiff. And whether it's Christ or Paul or Stephen especially, I think it's, even to this day, if we heard about a pastor saying that, or evangelist, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you're trying to win people. Don't invite that guy back. You know, honestly, one of the main purposes of my ministry, why I'm living, why I'm preaching, why I'm trying to minister, is to encourage people to think and to look at the way it was done in the Bible, and to consider how we need to be. There is an awful lot to this. At some point, yeah, Randy.
Doesn't all this boil down to one word, and that word would be inerrancy? And so many people that describe themselves as Christians are pickers and choosers. I believe this, but I'm not sure about that. But the scriptures we went over today, they're very obvious, very plain, and you know, I think that's, if you do not believe the Bible is without error, then we're shaking ground. I think that's where many denominations are, many Christians personally are.
I recently spoke to a person who graduated from a Christian college, who flat out told me that her professor said, I don't believe the Bible. And the fact is, if you don't believe the Bible, then you can never be authoritative about anything that you say, because you don't know everything. And then you'll sound like, and that's, you're exactly right, Randy, because that's what's at the basis of allowing everybody to stand at the end of the discussion, at the end of the argument, which Christ and Paul did not do. I'm firm on that point. They were bitter end arguers here. But if you don't believe you really have a word from God, then that's the only place you can really stand. I just truly might be wrong.
To Randy's point, and also to Carol's, it seems that the arguments to people who might not have been religious leaders were matter-of-fact statements, as opposed to, woe to you, Pharisees, scribes, hypocrites, where, I mean, he was angry
Sure.
and insulting to them because they were leading others astray.
Mm-hmm.
For people who didn't know or were questioning, it was, they didn't shy from the truth, but they seemed to, it was just matter of fact. They weren't in their faces trying to insult them, trying to offend.
Well said.
Yeah. I just wanted to see if you agree with that.
No, that's a great point. His peers, if you will, were offended at him, but he didn't curse them. He definitely cursed the scribes and Pharisees in Matthew 23. He leveled curses at them. It's a great point. Yes, Conrad.
My wife showed me this verse, so I'll share it. In 2 Thessalonians 5:14, now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded, support the weak, be patient toward all men. That may be kind of...
Can you read that again?
Yeah. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded, support the weak, be patient toward all men. That seems to support the idea of modifying maybe your mode of argument
to the audience.
on who you're.
Yeah, don't approach the unruly the same way as you approach the feeble-minded.
And I was also reading a book.
Excuse me for just hold your thought for a second. So if I'm trying to comfort you, no, the book.
It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. If anyone's ever read that book.
I have.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, the point of that book being just being abrasive and isn't going to get you very far in trying to get people to do what you want them to do or something like that. Can you maybe comment on?
Sure. Yeah, and who here has not heard of Dale Carnegie, not heard of it, How to Win Friends and Influence People? Almost, okay, pretty much no one. All right, who here is, so you've all heard of it, who here has read it? My hand's up. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of us have read the book. And here's where I'm going to, I really like to discuss that. That book is all about how to, if you want to make a friend, this is how you do it. And once you make the friend, this is how you influence that person to believe what you want to believe. Just like the Bible is not in the category of books, convincing someone of Christ is not necessarily in the same category either. In other words, to talk to someone about Christ being dead and buried and rise again from the dead, and we read from Acts 24 because Paul then, and Festus doesn't like it, or Felix doesn't like it, because he goes on to talk about things like the judgment, it says later on, and he doesn't like it. How do you convince someone in the normal way? Is it one thing to convince somebody to buy this car, the same thing as convincing them that they're under judgment? And I say no, it's not. And I would argue that How to Win Friends and Influence People works well for things that don't have eternal significance, may not be nearly as well the things that do, because we don't see, I would argue this point. I would argue the point that in the scriptures, when the truth is being told and your eternal destiny is at stake, and in the case of many nations, your nation's destiny is at stake, and your destiny is at stake, that Jeremiah, Christ, don't really follow. And at that point, as far as I can tell, having read both the Bible and How to Win Friends and Influence People, that the models are definitely not the same. Again, a lot of people read the book. I'd be interested to hear more about that. But I see totally different models. If we didn't have the Old Testament prophets and frankly the New Testament people, maybe that would be our model. But it's just not in the Bible for that. Yeah.
Pastor, to address the same point, is part of that difference of selling a car versus convincing someone they're under judgment, that difference is part of that, a difference in what our concern as Christians are? As a car salesman, it is on me to convince you to buy that car. That's on me. But as a Christian, it is not on me to save you. It is on me to make sure you have heard the gospel in its entirety. But I can't save you. That is left to God alone. Is that a major distinction that should be considered in that difference?
Sure it is, because there's a difference between convincing and declaring. Our first goal is to declare. We will not convince if we don't first declare. But that's the one thing we don't want to do, because we want to leave with our dignity. We want to leave with that intact. To say what Paul's saying, like in the beginning of 1 Corinthians, where he says, we preach Christ crucified. Jews, stumbling block, Greeks, foolishness. Preach it anyway. Paul's like, I got no dignity left. But I got the gospel, and they don't. a lot more can be said about that. Boy, good questions, yes.
And I struggle with this, but is it the difference between us being offensive and the truth being offensive? Because I think we can be offensive without telling the truth, or we can tell the truth and the truth can be offensive. And I struggle with being both and wanting to do both at the same time. I want to be offensive and I want to tell you the truth at the same time. So is that really, I struggle with it. I think there's something about that.
Sure, thanks for mentioning that. I guarantee anybody in this room, if you've ever shared the gospel with anyone ever, I'd be shocked if you haven't had the same thing happen to you. Because what happens is, oftentimes when you share it, they start out discussing the actual points of it, but very, very soon, it's you. It's you in their sights, and it's hard. It's kind of hard to take. Yeah, you get it. My prayer for all of us, and I was just thinking about, Tim, I was just thinking about this the other day. I can remember times when I was insulted even as a kid. But I think the key to Paul was he was so serious about Christ that he just didn't care if he was insulted or not. If we could all get to that point, it would be good for the gospel and good for us. But I would argue that most of the time, we're willing to push the gospel, to declare it until they get on us, and then we want to stop. Like, it's okay if the gospel's under attack and under question, but when they come to us, then we don't want to do it anymore. If we could just concentrate on declaring what is actually true. It's easy to say right here standing. It really is. But you have Paul, who just didn't care about anything else. I mean, he just really didn't. A lot more. Boy, I'd like to talk about, and I will briefly. I know I've mentioned before, it was Booker T. Washington, a man who was so focused on what he was trying to do, pull up as he called his people. He was insulted, he was mocked, he was ignored. He saw all that as maybe a distraction. But he had no time to get even with anyone. That's how focused he was on what he was doing. If we could be that, who knows if we could get there. So easy to say, so hard to do. Well, we've gone here fairly late. I thank you very much for your kind attention and good questions.